and all of that. We are live, and I just got to make sure that we're live everywhere. Some things have been hicking up, lots of hiccups, lots of hiccups all over the place. So let me just make sure that it's working, and I'm not seeing it over on Rumble just yet. I wonder if that's just needs a refresh. Nope. But we're live. It seems like everywhere. Ladies and gents, in the chat, just let us know where you're watching and if you're seeing it live at the moment, because I just want to make sure that this actually goes out. It's out on live on Rumble. Cool. We're good. We're good. David Charalambous, it's been a minute. It's been a minute. So it's difficult for us to get together because you're all the way in the UK.
Yes.
And I'm on the west coast of Canada. Well, currently, at the moment, I'm going to be switching time zones in a couple of months, which we were talking about just before we went live. But you're working in the UK. I'm in Canada, and we're just talking about now is the best time to get out of Canada. But it's not so great in the UK either. You guys have gone, you've gone crazy over there.
Yeah, I think Starmer doesn't realize that 1984 is actually a fictional book. It's not a playbook.
Right, it's not an instructional manual.
Yeah, it's not an instructional manual, but yeah, it's gone crazy. I mean, anyone that knows, you know, what's going on and who's pushing things is not surprised by what's happening.
So I've had you on the show before, and it's been a mind warp talking to you because you specialize in basically the science behind brainwashing. And you have the institute in England called Reaching People.
Yeah, reachingpeople.net, which is a project on trying to help people that know what's going on, understand behavior, and communicate with those that are falling for it, shall we say.
Right. And you've basically all but unplugged just to stay away from it. Last time we were talking, have you been on social media at all since?
I'm pretty much still unplugged. I go on from time to time just to post things, make some comments on various groups. But yeah, I pretty much extracted myself. I'm out on a, you know, out in the countryside now, miles from anywhere. I pop into Civilization, you know, every now and then when I go and play golf, etc.
And just see how crazy everyone's gotten because of it.
But the latest research is literally, it's quite unbelievable, and that's why explaining it to you is not so easy, because it's so hard to believe how the subject we're going to talk about works. But I've already tested, you know, we ran a project, me and my colleague Patrick, for about 3 to 6 months, seeing if we could shift our own self-perceptions, and it worked far greater than we even anticipated.
Whoa.
Like, it blew our minds. And this is why it's such an, I actually now, I was saying to Patrick the other day, I think it's probably the most important subject I've studied.
So you teased at me what we're going to be talking about tonight, but you didn't tell me, and I'm glad you didn't, because every time we chat, I want to experience it when the audience experiences it, when they hear what it is that you're telling. Because you and I, and for the audience, go back and watch some of the conversations we had. It's mind melting. And when I met you at the We Unify conference 2 years ago, your presentation was just, it was insane. I mean, we all had this feeling that, you know, we're being manipulated, and we hear about it, and we see, you know, TV shows about, you know, how people can be kind of subconsciously given suggestions and all this stuff. But, you know, a lot of people believe it on the surface, but don't realize just how deep this runs, and how much our governments and corporations and boardrooms around the world are discussing ways in order to manipulate all of us into believing certain things, and having primers that they can trigger at particular given times. That's insane. That's insane as it is. And you've uncovered a lot of that. So what are we hearing about today?
Well, this one is, we're going to talk a lot about self-perception theory. And before I go into what that is, I think everyone would understand that self-image is a very, very important concept.
Right.
Yeah. How you see yourself determines how you behave, what you do, etc. And if certain things can influence the way we see ourselves, then that's when we have a very big problem with manipulation. Okay. Now, in the textbook that the UK government uses, which is called Mindspace, which they give to all their government departments in how to influence the public, which first of all, we got to ask, are they crossing lines? And yes, they are, in my opinion. But on page 66, they mention the public won't be happy when they find out about this document. And on page 67, it mentions is manipulating the public's identity. Now, what was interesting is that when I first went through that, I sort of got it on a surface level, the identity bit, and I kind of understood they were doing it. But it was only when I went deep into self-perception theory that I realized the mechanism. And that's the key thing, because I'm pretty sure all your viewers and listeners will understand propaganda manipulation exists. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's only when you know the specific mechanism is then you can explain it to someone else, and then you can understand it and start protecting yourself from it and start waking people up to it. Because if you just say we're being manipulated, people go, yeah, whatever. If they're being manipulated, and those that know how it's going on just know it's going on. So the specific mechanisms are so key. Now, if we talk about a magic trick, for instance, and that's what's going on, is that most people, well, most of your viewers and listeners will know that a magic trick is occurring. Okay. And they won't fall for it anymore once they know it's happening. Okay. And that's the thing. Once you understand the mechanisms, it makes that understanding much simpler. That makes sense. And funny enough, I got invited to do a presentation to a group of entrepreneurs in London. And they had a magician on, a very good one. And he did something. And he was also paid to show us some of his tricks, which you never get to see. So it was quite a good experience. Now, he got someone up from the audience onto the stage, and he stood us somewhere, and then he said, no, come forward. No, go back a little. No, go left a little. Go right. No, that's perfect. Now, afterwards, he explained to us he did that for a very specific reason. He knew exactly where he wanted her, and he could have put her there straight away, but he wanted her to follow 4 commands.
Okay.
Because what happens is when you start doing what someone asks, and in a short succession, you then sort of go on autopilot. So because she went, okay, he's given me order, I've done it. He's given me order, I've done it. He's given me order, I've done it. So when he then went sleep, she just dropped unconscious.
Is that
crazy.
Real, or is that?
That's real. The craziest thing is that this thing that I'm going to talk about, self-perception theory, is a process that happens to all of us. Okay. But you will be guarded against it happening to you when you don't want it to, under various conditions. And one of those is if you have clearly defined views on a subject. Yeah, which is why a lot of people are immune to a lot of the manipulation now. So if you have clearly defined views on a new medical product, yeah, and you just know you're not going to do it, no amount of propaganda is going to work. Okay, because you have a very clear idea. Yeah, so that's where that's key. And there's actually we did, that question that comes up, why can I see it and the others can't? We've done maybe another podcast we can do in the future, Clyde, on this, because we've identified 9 clear reasons why people can see the magic trick and others can't. And it's very interesting because everyone assumes it's just one thing, but in fact there's 9 different reasons. But coming back to self-perception theory.
So quick story, because I've run into this in my life. I used to be a smoker, and a long time ago I wanted to quit smoking. I tried the patch, I tried a bunch of things, and I heard about a hypnotist, and so I went to a hypnotist, and I went and I had a session and couldn't do anything, couldn't get me under, or whatever you call it. And then I went and did a second session with him just to try again. And at the end of it, he just said, you're not suggestible. Some people just aren't suggestible. And I'm like, I had no idea what that meant, or what the science or anything was that behind that. He's just like, sorry, I can't do it. You're just one of those people that you're not suggestible, so it can't happen. Yeah. And that's that. So is that one of the features, or one of the?
Well, that's, it kind of comes under when the ability to just go on autopilot and follow commands. So they talk about 10 to 20% of people are not in that sort of vulnerable range, as it were. And they tend to be the outliers of people that see what's going on. But of course, with democracy, it's kind of irrelevant because it's, it's tyranny of the masses, isn't it?
Right.
So it's just managing that group of society and keeping them from informing everyone else.
That's terrible. What was the experiment with the lines? They had the
oh yes, that was Solomon Asch. What's fascinating about that is that Solomon Asch ran that study because he didn't believe it was true.
Oh, okay. So he didn't actually believe it. So he ran the study.
Yeah, because there was a previous study where a guy had done a study on, I think it was dots moving. Okay. And the dot wasn't moving, but people were told it was, and then they claimed it was moving. And Solomon Asch didn't believe this was true, and he thought there was a faulty setup in the study. So he used line lengths because he was saying, people didn't know the exact reason of the dot moving. So he said, if we make it very clear that line lengths, and it's so obvious of the answer, then I show you that people won't comply. And in fact, they did comply. It
and
kind of blew his mind.
And I think what was it, 10% of the people didn't comply. It was
that
same
10%.
10%.
There's some very interesting stats around that because it all depends on if someone speaks up, then it provides a stage that other people will. That's why censorship is so dangerous, because you've got that illusion of consensus.
Or why it's so important for people who actually want to manipulate the masses, right? Yes. And that's terrifying because, I mean, we're seeing more of it now. England, you have people who are, being arrested over Facebook posts. That's coming to Canada in very short order. Bill C9, I don't know if you heard about it. That's the bill that's basically going to make quoting the Bible illegal in Canada. That's passed through the parliament, and now it's going to go through an unelected Senate full of left-wing ideologues, in my estimate, and it's probably going to get passed through there. And that's scary. It's terrifying.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think how far things have come.
Exactly. Well, censorship is massive and key. And we saw that during COVID. Without the censorship, I don't think it would have lasted quite as long, or if people would have complied quite to the extent that they did.
It would have collapsed very quickly, as the 2009 one did. Because there was a fake pandemic in 2009 that didn't get through. It was a German doctor busted it, and it just collapsed. You remember the swine? I think it was a swine flu, wasn't it?
Yeah, was that SARS, or they did the SARS Fest in Toronto? Was that around that time?
Yeah, there's I can't remember the exact details, but I know they tried it in 2009, failed, and then obviously learned from the mistakes.
Right, and they're like, yeah, no, censorship is key, and compliance across academia. That was the big one.
Where this behavioral science piece, I think, is critical to it all.
Well, let's get into it. What is it?
Well, self-perception theory. Okay, maybe if I tell you how I came across this. So I was watching a TED talk by Jenny Cross, which is a very good TED talk, but like nearly every behavioral scientist or person that is an expert on perception, they can't see their own blind spots. So, whenever you watch these people, you're going to see lots of stuff where they talk about subjects where we know might not be true, like climates, etc. But the TED talk itself is very good, and she talks about 3 myths of behavior. Number 1 is education changes behavior. We know that's not true. Okay. Number 3 was people know what motivates them. And in my work, we also know that's not true. But number 2 was really jarring for me, because all of my training pretty much says that identity and beliefs drive behavior. Okay. So who you think you are drives your behavior. And whilst that's true to a certain degree, what she says is if you want to change someone's opinions and behavior, you actually get them to do a behavior. So you don't actually have to change attitudes or beliefs to get behavior change. Now, this really blew my mind, and it contradicted so much, and it kind of sat there as a cognitive dissonance for a number of months. And then what happened was, like, to fund this project, about 3 years ago, I sold my house, and I said to you, I went out to the sticks and just rented, and I used that money to fund the project and do what I did. And then I was kind of coming to the end of the savings, and you know, I'd become single and all these things. So I was in a bit of a what do I do next sort of moment, not feeling great. And a friend of mine, Patrick, who's, you know, really successful in, you know, qualifications, etc., was in a very similar spot. He's got a PhD in communication. We're saying, look, for everything we know and we're doing, we should be pretty motivated and we should be really successful. But I had always been so hopeful, but I'd reached a few week period where I was just feeling a bit flat. And we said, right, okay, what do we do about this? So we created this little process where we created this, we called it a daily process sheet, where we were going to do a few things each day and we were going to share them, and we were going to be each other's cheerleader. So we were effectively using what's known as self-perception theory, i.e. creating a behavior in order to shift our motivational state. That makes sense?
Okay. Yeah.
And what happened was that after a few weeks, we felt like so motivated, it was crazy, right? and what we were doing was only taking 15 to 20 minutes a day. But because we had set the conditions up so perfectly, what happened is we became super motivated. Our productivity went through the roof, and we became very hopeful. And knowing what I know, it's not always easy to stay hopeful. I mean, I do normally manage to do it, but but this, and it kind of blew our minds, and we're like, what's going on here? Because we were expecting to, you know, to start getting things done and then start solving some of the issues that we needed to, you know, make money, etc., and stuff like that to survive. But we suddenly became very, very motivated, and our well-being went up and our happiness went up. And I thought, what the hell's going on here? So then it got me to revisit this self-perception theory, which goes like this, is that you do a behavior, and then what happens is the mind, so generally your identity drives your behavior, okay? And but there's also a feedback loop in there where your brain is observing your own behavior in order to change your attitudes and beliefs. That makes sense?
Say that one more time.
Yeah, it's so hard to get your head around this to do initially. What it is you're watching your own behavior to determine if your beliefs and opinions should change.
So okay. Hold on. So so you're watching your own behavior, but if the behavior ends up being good for you, then that's the trigger. Is that what you're saying? Well,
what happens is, I think, however we got where we are, whether it's evolution, God, intelligence, it's what similar, whatever it is, the way that the brain functions, and there's a few different theories about why this self-perception theory is there, but it's unquestionable that it is, because there's just too much evidence. And so let me give you an example, because this is why this is so good, this chat, Clyde, because getting my head around this initially, there was smoke coming out my ears, right?
Right, okay. So I don't feel bad.
But once I got it, it was an incredible, powerful lever for me to become the person that I, you know, to certain behaviors that I want to change. It became much easier to change them using this than direct interventions. So,
okay.
So the communists, the Chinese communists knew about this. So, you know, when you see a prisoner of war suddenly, you know, go from being like a Democrat, Christian or whatever to a communist, and you're like, what's happening there? Okay. This is the process by which they do it. So what they do is they have the prisoner. They initially start with a little thing where they say, oh, well, for instance, say it's an American prisoner of war in a Korean war camp, etc. They'd say, you know, well, all countries have their flaws. So what are some of the American flaws of the country? So they just get them to start thinking a little thing, right? And they just do that time and time again. And then they get them to write out, communism has its advantages because, etc. So they just get them to do a written statement. Then what happens is the brain is watching that, and it starts to subtly change the unconscious mind. And then once they do it enough in small enough increments, the prisoner of war actually becomes a communist. And they did this with great success.
Wow.
Okay.
But I'm hoping that 10% of unsuggestible people could be, you can't do that to them. Is that part of it, or is this like, does this work on everyone?
Well, it depends. Well, see, it's a process that's always working. So think about it. How do you know who you are? Okay. So think about what happened in the lockdowns and everything else. Those of us that stood up and spoke out, then we're building an identity of a person that's not going to be manipulated. So that's self-perception theory at work. I mean, essentially, you're literally observing the sort of person you are. So what's really key is that it's an automatic process that happens in order for you to move around in the world and survive and get on with everyone else. Okay. But if it goes unchecked, that's when you can end up having your image distorted without your realization. Okay. So think about how many people have imposter syndrome. Okay. That is the thing where they're very good at what they do, but they feel nervous or doubt, etc. Okay. That isn't a choice. That's where certain conditions have happened where that's built a self-image that way. The person wouldn't choose.
And that's why they feel like they're an imposter. They've built a self-image that doesn't feel like what their behavior, their actual, what they do is them.
Yeah, but the self-image, I mean, the imposter syndrome is a little bit more complex than that, because it's actually a negative experience early on. Okay. Because the incentives are really key to this, i.e. what your positive associations are. But if we just try and stick to the self-perception theory, because it's smoke out the ears stuff, in that once the person watches their own behavior, then they start to adapt their self-image. And think about the people during the lockdowns that were considered themselves maybe liberals or my body, my choice. By the end of it, they were, hold that other person down and inject them.
Right.
Because it was all about the constant repeated, and this is what's key about it. If you do a behavior for 21 days and you hold the pressure on that behavior, the self-image will start to change.
Okay.
So anyone that, for instance, as an example, my self-image was that I would get up in the morning, I would try and do 20 things, I'd only get 10 things done. So I'm seeing myself as not completing things. That makes sense? Even though I got lots of work done, I always had that feeling that I was always behind, et cetera, et cetera. But when we did this DPS, i.e. this daily sheet, we just had 3 things. We focused there. We got those 3 things done. And then my mind changed. Okay, I'm a person that gets things done. And I saw the ripple effect in the rest of my behavior.
Wow. Okay.
Because if you look at, there's a book by J.B. Fogg called Tiny Habits. And what he says is that, and it's a great model, and that behaviors happen because there's effectively a reward or a punishment. Okay. Now, if you say, he gives the example of flossing your teeth. So he says, if you want to floss your teeth, okay, what normally happens is people try and floss all their teeth. They have a bad experience. That builds a negative association. Then they don't want to do it again. But he says you get around that by flossing one tooth, celebrating, okay, and then the next day 1 tooth, the next day 2 teeth. And then what happens is your unconscious mind, which is like the horse that we ride, builds a positive association. It gets drawn towards it. That makes sense. So what me and Patrick accidentally did was build a positive association with getting stuff done, rather than the I've got 100 things to do. We just said, no, let's do 3 things, get them done. And you start to see it's a completely different mindset. And it's effectively hacking behavior.
Okay.
So now think about all the policies that came through from the governments. So what you have, and we put an article on the website about this, which is treated like animals, trained like animals, which is they forced us to do many things. And obviously a lot of us didn't do those things, but those people that did them, and it's much better if it's voluntary. Okay, so that's where they say, oh, you have an option to say no. You don't really have an option to say no, and that's when the self-perception works. So as an example, and this also explains Festinger cognitive dissonance studies. So Festinger coined the term cognitive dissonance. And what he did, he had two groups of students and he had them do a really boring task. Okay. And then what he said to them, he said, oh, can you tell the next participant that the task was interesting? Half of the people, right? And this is a bit, it can take you a minute to get your head around this. Half of the people were given $1. The other half were given $20. Now in the 70s, $20 was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now, after the study, the real study was determine what those two groups of participants, how they saw the actual exercise. So he said to them afterwards, the $1 group, that exercise you did, was it interesting or boring? And most of them said, oh, it's quite interesting. And the $20 one said, oh, it was really boring.
And what's the answer behind that? Why?
The answer is it's the rationalization that happens in the mind. So the ones that got $20 were okay to lie because there was a big reward.
Oh, so they felt it that it was interesting, but they...
No, the ones that got $20 knew it was boring.
Oh, okay.
Because they didn't have to rationalize, because they could say, well, I obviously lied to the next participant because I got $20 to do so. The ones that only got $1 couldn't justify lying for the dollar. So their self-perception had to change to pretend that the thing was interesting. Now, think about the get the jab for a donut and a burger.
So there was more to that than just, wow, that's insidious.
Yeah. So what you're seeing is the reward is there to push the justification that what you're doing must be the right thing to do, because you can't.
And that's why it was such a shitty reward for the jab.
Yes.
A donut. Yeah. Or a burger, French fries, I think was what they did in New York.
Yeah, it had the reverse effect. Now, this is when, and this is where smoke starts coming at the edge. Start thinking about this. But when you start to think about self-perception theory, what's going on is the brain, because there's so much going on that you can't consciously make sense of everything. So the brain, this is why this is there. The brain's observing your own behavior to say, what sort of person am I? How do I act in these situations? What do I need to do in here? So then when you start say you join a different group of, community, etc., and then you have to fit in. So you have to act in the same way as the rest of the community. And then when you do, your self-image will change.
Okay.
So it makes perfect sense that this is a process where you don't have to sit down and think, oh, what do I need to do here? What do I need to do there? Because the brain, the unconscious mind, is designed for survival. It's not designed for truth and, reflection, all these things. So when you think about that, the self-perception theory makes perfect sense. And then when you think about what the behavioral scientists are trying to do is it works like this. They want to get you to act, okay? And then what happens is once you've acted, then you explain it to yourself why you've done that, and then your self-image changes. Now, people won't say, I did that because I am a coward or I'm a sheep. Will they?
No, they want to be a hero. They wanna...
Exactly. So what happens is, so then they're sort of herded into a behavior, and that's a really appropriate term. Once they then do that behavior, they're then going to tell themselves a story. Okay. And then that story becomes their identity. So that's when they go, right, well, I'm shopping my neighbor in because I'm a virtuous person and it's the right thing to do.
Wow.
Can you see how it's working now? So it, fact, works back to front, and this, whilst very uncomfortable, and that's why I'd say to the viewers and the listeners, be okay with that discomfort for a while, because once this starts to make sense, so much of other people's behavior will then make sense, because it's such a critical piece.
Wow.
And as I presented this to one of my groups, and one of them said, wow, this feels like a massive piece of the puzzle. And I said, yeah. And for me, it was a piece of the puzzle that was turned a little bit to the side, because I always knew about it, but I didn't know quite how important it was. And it was only when I started experimenting with it and the piece sort of turned, and then it fit in. And then I could see why so much of the government stuff is getting people to do something. So take any subject, take cashless, for instance. Okay. The choice architects, now these are the guys that build your choices. Okay. Now, once you understand that the choices you have are so important because it then affects your behavior and then it will have a knock-on effect to your self-image. See how that works? So if you go around.
Yes, actually, that's starting to come together now.
Yes. So basically you go into a cafe and then it's cashless and then they're like, oh, it's money is dirt. You know, they give you all the fancy excuses and then you tap your card. So the path of least resistance is very key to all this because the default mode of the brain is to conserve energy. Okay. And if you remind me, I answer the question later, why do people run marathons? Because I think we can explain that now. Because it's counter to we want to conserve energy. So the path of least resistance is always the most appealing to people, especially if you're in a rush.
Yeah.
So if you create a cashless cafe and then you incentivize the cafe by you making it difficult for them to pay money into the bank and et cetera, et cetera. So both parties are incentivized to do this, even though it's completely against their freedoms and it's going to have a massive negative consequence in the future. That person starts paying with the card. Because I had this with someone I was playing golf with the other day. They said, oh, I just don't carry cash anymore. I'm the kind of, you know, modern person, as it were. So what happens is once that habit starts to happen, okay, it's got the brain's going to observe itself and says, oh, that's the sort of person I am. Contrary to that, those people that know how important cash is are going to do the exact opposite.
Right. There's a story about Marty up north. We were at the We Unify conference last year, and they had a cafe, just like you're describing, and they didn't take cash. And Marty had his card; he could have done it, but he just on principle, he just gave the copy back, and he gave her shit. And he's like, no, I'm not. Keep your damn coffee then. And that was him. But he's a contrarian type person. He won't take orders like that. So instead of just complying, which a lot of people in that position probably would have, I mean, I'll probably be honest with you. I probably would have, because I use my tap all the time.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because, you know, I frequent in Japan quite often, right? I used to live there. My wife's from there. We're heading there for 3 weeks next month. And Japan is a very cash-centric society.
Yes.
It's very opposite of what Canada's become, and I'm just so used to tapping everywhere I go in Canada. But it's just a behavior. You just have that. And I noticed that in a 3-week period of being in Japan, you totally get used to just having cash. Everyone else is doing it. It's just it's what it is, and you don't think twice about it.
Yeah. See, and this is what's so key about this, because if they can get a behavior automatic, the rest takes care of itself. So with the, I'm just going to, so with the prisoner of war guys, they just had them think a certain way, then act a certain way by writing it out. And it has such a powerful effect. Now, another one of those studies, they asked people what their opinion was on a subject, okay? And then they got them to write a counter argument. So they had them write an essay on the opposing view, and many of them changed their view.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could see that.
Okay? Because what it is, when you're starting to, you know, vouch for that other side, and it also should give a lot of the people listening some of the ways that you can actually start to get people becoming aware. And that's why, do you remember the last thing I said at my presentation was do one thing?
Yes.
That was why I kind of knew then what it was, but I didn't know to the depth of why that's important. Because when you do that one thing, you're observing your own behavior, then you feel that you can do it, and then you start to change your behavior. So the choice architects, as they were, these are the behavioral scientists that are, for instance, when you sign up on a website for a subscription, you notice how it takes you like 30 seconds, right? And you notice how if you try to cancel, it takes you like forever.
Unsubscribe to a service. Yeah, it's like, it's always hard
I had
to find.
Me and Patrick the other day, I had something auto renew, and we sat there for ages because it just kept going around in a loop. They're here. We emailed them, you know, sorry, this email box isn't monitored, blah, blah, blah. But because I knew they were doing that on purpose, probably, that I would just give up and leave the subscription, I just continued until I got through to them. Okay. But you see, this is the thing. These are the choice architects. These guys are creating the environment that a certain behavior will occur. Okay. So that's one piece of the puzzle. The next piece is that self-perception theory will then engage itself, and you'll start noticing your own behaviors. And if those behaviors happen long enough, then the identity and the self-image will change.
So is this like what a lot of self-help guru types have been doing for such a long time? The whole idea of like, just do positive things and then everything positive will change from that. If you just
under certain conditions. And that's the thing.
Okay.
You have to understand the conditions, because like when people say affirmations, the words aren't the key, the feeling of the words are the key.
Okay.
So and I mean, we could, you know, the next thing I'm going to talk about, we could talk about for hours and hours, but what's key is the feeling that comes up from the unconscious mind is the communication from that part of the mind that knows your real self-image.
Okay.
Okay. So if you go, I'm gonna, whatever your goal is, and the unconscious mind says, no, you're not that sort of person, that's when you'll get the negative feeling.
Right.
But that negative feeling, again, is not the truth. It's just a feeling. So we've got a series of processes and exercises where we can actually communicate that feeling back to get the self-image shifted. So then the affirmation will work, or whatever the goal is will work. Because this is what's key. When you set goals in your mind, and the unconscious mind's always setting goals, and that's part of the problem, is that a lot of the time your conscious goals will conflict with the unconscious. And the unconscious is purely concerned with your survival. So what you have is what we says is the cage of comfort is effectively, and they've shown this, a lot of people have a ceiling on how much they can earn because it doesn't feel right to go beyond. And that's the unconscious mind putting the brakes on, and then the behavior will change. But this is where it's so fascinating, because the mistake that most people make is they're trying to change their self-image directly, or they're trying to control their behavior. But because they try to do too much too soon, the brakes come on the unconscious mind. And they, like, for instance, the New Year's resolutions, like I think it's 98% of them fail. And the reason that everyone's in the gym in January and then they don't go in February is because, in my opinion, they build, the two things that happen is they build a negative association with going to the gym, i.e. it doesn't feel good.
Right.
Because it hurts and it's effort and whatever.
And it's cold getting to the gym in January.
And they don't maintain it long enough to change the self-image. The people that go to the gym and enjoy the gym have a self-image of a gym goer.
Right.
So the key, and this would be my advice, particularly to personal trainers, the key is to shrink the behavior so it's not uncomfortable, and then build a positive association to the behavior.
Okay, so let's say a physical activity goal, for example. How small would you start?
I would go to the gym and work out for 5 minutes.
So you still go to the gym, make it an effort to actually go to that place.
Yes.
And then what would be the reward for that?
At the end of it, you go, yes, I did it.
Oh, okay.
And if you see,
that's all it takes. That's
all it takes. This is what's crazy, right?
Oh, wow.
That is enough to release the dopamine, because even if you know what you're doing, that makes it even more powerful. You say to yourself, right, this is the first step on a journey to building a very positive habit. See, because the key isn't what you consciously feel about it. The key is what you unconsciously feel about it. Because what you unconsciously feel about it is what provides the feelings.
Okay.
So think about advertising. Okay. Would anyone in their right mind eat a burger that doesn't go off for 13 years?
Yeah, I've seen that. The McDonald's burgers that are just
Yeah. But the constant association with pleasure in that, and this is why we built the workshop for people to take back control of their own mind. Okay, because the key is that all advertising is built on that principle, is building the positive association to the behavior. Then the behavior happens, and then if it happens frequently enough, the self-image changes and you become, like, for instance, a lot of people that buy a certain product, Apple's the classic example. Okay, once they bought a few Apple products and they get that buzz from being the latest tech guy, whatever, they're pretty much going to buy only Apple from then on.
Okay? Yeah, I can probably see that. Yeah,
that's the identity of the person. I'm an Apple user, is what they would say, rather than I buy Apple products. Yeah, it becomes an identity. That's why this crossover between behavior and identity is so key. And when you look at the pandemic, well, whatever that was, it was all about getting people to act certain ways. The signs on the floors, the masks, all those things. And in fact, there is some theories that they were ludicrous on purpose.
Right.
Because then the rationalization is, well, I just need to do what I'm told, rather than I need to do sensible things.
Or even further, I'm a hero because I'm doing this. And this is a really strange thing, because a friend of mine, Alex Zoltan, he's a writer, journalist. He covered a story in Vancouver, one of the universities in Vancouver, where there was a big protest going on. I'm even drawing a blank on what it was about, but it was these Gen Z protesters, and they had this encampment. And at the encampment, it was ridiculous. They were all wearing masks. Like, this is long past COVID. They're all wearing masks. They all have orderly everything. They go to bed at a certain time. They had quiet time. They had all these rules written down. And it was just absolutely ridiculous. And Alex came up with this theory. He said, when you saw the Freedom Convoy, it was kind of like Gen Xers having their protest moment. And they're going out there and they're basically reliving the fun times of their heyday. And what was the fun times for the Gen Xers? Going out and having bush parties and doing all these things, drinking alcohol and fireworks and all this stuff. And we saw lots of that at the Freedom Convoy with this group. But then he had this other thing, and I can't remember what the protests again still, but he had this theory that those kids, that their heyday was when they were staying home and playing video games and being antisocial, and they were told that they were being heroes for doing it.
Yeah, well, that's the story, because the person's going to tell themselves a story, but if the propagandists can actually tell them the story and it makes them feel good, then that's even more powerful for that sort of act, story become.
Wow.
Let me share another study, because this kind of is mind-blowing in itself, but then when you see it in the context of what we're talking about, it makes it more real. So I've mentioned the California road sign study. Did I talk to you about that one?
No, I haven't heard that.
Okay. So they went to a group of residents in California, and they had this big ugly sign, unsightly, nasty, and they said to the residents, can we put this in your front garden? And it said, please drive carefully. 17% of people said yes. Okay.
Whoa, even with the ugly sign, they're right out of the gate. So like, yeah, sure.
So those people, but that's a pretty low take up, but it's still, 17% of people had already had that sort of behavior. It went to a different group and they got 76% to agree.
And how did they do that?
2 weeks before, they got them to sign a petition.
And what was in the petition?
Do you support safe driving laws?
That's all it took.
So now you see why these it's mind-blowing, isn't it?
And it was purposefully an ugly sign.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So it goes from 16 to 76. Now, anyone knows that is an insane jump in compliance.
That is massive.
Okay. Now you start to understand that lots of these little questions and things, some of, a lot of them are harmless and not, but a lot of them are intentionally designed to evoke behavior that behavior will then affect the self-image.
Wow. Like, this reminds me of the I got this from The Century of the Self, a BBC documentary. It was about Edward Bernays was a big actor in this one.
Yes.
And Edward Bernays, I think he was the nephew of
Sigmund
Freud. Yeah. So he was the one who coined public relations instead of propaganda. They changed the name to it. Public relations.
Every 20 or 30 years, they just change the name.
Yeah, it's the same thing. But he had this study because they wanted to launch a product, I think Betty Crocker, and it was the Easy Bake Cake.
That's it.
And so they gave it out to these women in a study group, and they all hated it.
Yeah.
And it was simple. It was just simple, like add water and mix it up and throw it in the oven. And they hated it. And they had to figure out why. And so they ran another study where they changed the recipe, but not the formula. So the only thing that changed was on the box, it said add water, I think a bit of milk, and crack an egg into it.
Yes, it was the egg that made the difference.
And it was the egg that made the difference.
Yes.
Can you explain why?
Because they felt like they were cheating. Okay. So this is like the IKEA effect. So when people buy IKEA furniture, they value it more, and they value it more because they've had to put it together themselves.
They value it more because they put it together themselves.
Yes.
So even though it's just a piece of shit. Cheap.
Yeah, but they've done some work on it. See, this is like the sunk cost.
So now they love it. Yeah. Whoa. Okay. Right. I didn't know this. I didn't know that this was a thing.
Right. Well, here's right. So this next story is very interesting. And it's the $300 million button. Okay. Now,
$300 million what?
Button. On a button. On a website, right?
Oh, okay.
And this is in lots of the behavioral science education. And people think it's Best Buy in the US, but no one can confirm it. So the coders at this company, they noticed that half the people in the checkout phase would basically just close the cart and leave. Okay. Because it had the register and people didn't want to give over their information. Okay. So when they changed the button from register to continue, sales went up $300 million in a year. Okay? Right. Now, what was even more fascinating about this is once the person had purchased the product, they were quite happy to give their details, but they didn't want to give them before they purchased the product.
But once they've purchased it, then they're fine to give their details.
Yes. Now, there's also a story from The Science and Practice of Influence by Cialdini, which is, and in that book, anyone that's read it, he goes and studies at all these different sales companies to work out, how influence works. And he's in the car with one salesman. They go around to all these different houses, and he noticed that this salesman did the same thing every time. And he said to him, "Can I just ask you why you're doing this?" And the salesman was very cagey. He wouldn't tell him. And in the end, he caved in. And what it was, the salesman would go in. They would have a questionnaire for the couple on these, I think it was burglar alarms or fire alarms. And halfway through, he'd say, "Oh, sorry, I've forgotten something at my car. Can I just go back and let myself back in?" Okay. And the people would say, "Yeah, sure," like give them a key or say, "Yeah, just open the door." And Cialdini said, "Why do you do that?" He said, "Well, think about it. Who do you let into your house? People
someone that you trust. Yeah.
So in those people's minds, that salesman goes from being a salesman to someone they trust. And that was the only thing that he did different from every other salesman. And he had massive more sales. Now that is completely unethical. And he's obviously stumbled on it accidentally. But what that shows you is, this is a good time to talk about the adaptive unconscious, in that you can't possibly think about all the things you need to think about. There's just too many things. Think about if I mentioned the word cat, okay, and you had to think about every memory you had about cat in order to apply it. It's impossible. So the brain does all of that for you automatically. Now, all that storage of that information, the storage of all that behavior, like if you went to a stag do versus your grandma's barbecue, you would act differently, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Okay. But you wouldn't on the drive there say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do. You just do it automatically, don't you?
Yeah. Okay? Yeah. It all just comes natural.
That's the adaptive unconscious. Now, what's going on is that your self-image is stored in the adaptive unconscious, and it's constantly shifting according to what you do and what you think and what you're exposed to. So the propagandist can do this outside of your awareness, and all those things change and you wouldn't be aware of him. Okay?
Right. So you would behave different with a salesman that you trust versus someone who you might be skeptical. So if he pulls that little thing on you, you adapt to a world with a trustworthy person.
Yeah, which is why it's very important to have a self-image of honesty. And that's why, you know, a moral code is very key. That's why socialism hates religion, family, and private property. Okay. And they're the things that it generally wants to get rid of because it's competition for the state.
Because they want to be the moral code.
They want to be the central. They want to be the thing that you're hooked into, plugged into. And of course, that's why you can, anyone that sees what's coming with the universal basic income and all these climate credits and all these things, social currency, all these things can see.
It feels very much like a religion, does it not?
Yeah, well, that is in itself. I mean, that thing that you mentioned about those students, that sounds like a cult to me. But you see, this is why it's so key, because it really was. I mean, I've studied this subject for 25, 30 years, and the mistake that I think I don't make is that I'm not immune to it. Okay.
Right.
And the fact that myself and Patrick were able to get such leverage to our own self-image in such a short space of time by understanding all the variables is a testament that you can, because there'd be people, a number of people would say to me, oh, yeah, I know about manipulation propaganda. And I think, but if you don't know specifically and you don't know, the mechanisms, then it's only a concept. It's not something you can apply. And that's why, lots of people know specific parts of the mechanisms and they will be able to explain to someone, oh, that's because of that. Like, did you, in the UK, we had the banging of the pots and pans. Did you guys have that?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
That was when a particular time of day, everybody would come outside and do the thing.
Can you see why that ritual is there now?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because once you bang that pots and pans and you do it regular, and that was the whole point about it. It ticked all the boxes to get the ritual. It's like cults have rituals, all these things, but groups have rituals. Rituals are not bad in themselves, but when they're used to manipulate people, then you can say they're bad. So that was done. The people that start banging the pots and pans, like, why am I doing this? I'm supporting the heroes, blah, 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 all that stuff. So then they're going to question less, right?
But the heroes don't hear you because the heroes are off doing their thing. So
yeah,
it's not a meaningful thing that you're doing for the heroes. It's a meaningful thing for you to fall in line and do the right behavior.
So it's all about behavior, get the behavior done. And it's really, there's lots of information around if the behavior is influenced and propagandized, it's better than compulsory. Because if it's compulsory, you can have this, because it's all, see, the key is the interpretation. If you're forced to do something, you can actually have the story in your mind. I wouldn't do this if I wasn't forced.
That's right. So you can. So you would feel animus towards the people who were forcing you to do it, and then you wouldn't want to do it moving forward.
Yeah, but if you have all the subtle nudges like social pressures and all these things, then you can actually then do the behavior, and then it's really a key. The story is the key. Okay, the interpretation, because it's going to be built from there. So all the people, and you see these quotes where they say there is no one more virtuous than a coward. Okay, because they will how many people will turn around and say, oh, I'm just a sheep, I'm just going to do as I'm told? Like, no one. They're all going to be that story that they were given. Okay. And this is why when you contradict that story, you become the enemy and you become the person that has to be pushed away. Okay. It's all about these invisible levers, effectively, are shifting the self-image. And when that self-image, so, you know, I remember playing poker, like during one of the lockdowns, and they said, oh, are you going to take the vaccine? I said, well, not if you give me $1 million. And I said, are you? And he goes, yes. And I said, why? Because I believe in science. Right. So obviously been watching too much TV, but of course that's the, oh, you're going to do it. And then the story is because you believe in science, and then you become the pro-science people. And if you want to,
because that's what science is about. It's about believing.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's not, you know, I mean, Aaron Siri wrote the book, didn't he? Amen. You know, it's all about, it's like a religion. So see, that's the thing. It's the action, then the story, then the identity, and the story, the people. Like if you, that's right. I was going to say, if you want to see a bunch of foaming dogs, go into one of the Facebook groups on science and question one of the posts. Okay.
Oh, right. No, freak out.
Like, yeah, because you'll just because they're not, you know, because this is where the contradiction comes in. You know, science is about observation and question assumptions, but you're not allowed to question these assumptions. Yeah. Right. And that's when feeling comes into it, because the person is not aware that their mind has been hijacked, and the feeling that they're getting, okay, they've identified with it.
Right.
Okay? So the voice in your head might not be saying something that you believe in. It might just be a habit or something you've heard. And that's why one of the key things is to observe your own behavior and observe your own thoughts, because it's just a sensible thing to do. Because if you've developed a habit from 5 or 6, and of course, these are the most problematic ones because they happen before you are conscious enough to have discernment. Okay. I see it like if ever I'm playing golf, you see a lot of children on the golf course, myself included, getting angry at missing a shot. Like, it just looks ridiculous, but it's just a habit. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I think I find myself, I catch myself in this sometimes. You know, I'll hear what is like a shibboleth. You know what a shibboleth is, like the an identifying word from a particular group of people. I'll hear one of those phrases and I'll immediately cast judgment on those people.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it happens to be. You know, you hear somebody says like late stage capitalism, for example, and you're like, oh, you're one of those socialists, you know. I have an idea of all the things that you believe, and then you cast that on them, and I'm guilty of it. But I think it's one of those path of least resistance things where I hear that thing, and then my behavior is to just go, oh, that's a lost cause. I'm not even dealing with that person.
Yeah. But I can understand that, because what you've got as well is that the conditioning comes in bunches. Okay. So I remember, I don't know, a year ago walking the dog, and I got talking to some other dog walkers, and we were chatting about, you know, people being injured, etc., from the vaccine. And then one of them was an NHS manager, so was foaming at the mouth. And then, you know, I could guess that he's going to be a Biden follower, and then, you know, like all these other things, you know, he's going to be into trans rights and all. They literally come because it's almost like both sides, the left and the right, are being conditioned with opposites, so they fight each other. Yeah. When effectively it's all about, you know, what do I really, you know, what's correct, what's to believe in? Because when you look at the statistics around political affiliation, it's pretty crazy. In that, if they take like in the UK, there was a big study done about 8 years ago, I think it was, and they looked at Labour supporters and Conservative supporters. And what they did was they split them into 4 different groups and they proposed a new policy. And the policy was to add 1p to VAT to pay for 10,000 extra nurses. And it was a sham policy. It was just testing the theory. And they they asked half the Labour supporters about this new policy, and they said to them it was a Labour policy. Then the other half of Labour supporters, they said it was a Conservative policy, and they did vice versa with the Conservatives.
Right.
It turned out that you were more likely to support the policy if it came from your own party. But have a guess the percentages increase.
Oh, was it something ridiculous like 70%? Like
It
you
500%.
Shut up.
So it actually didn't matter what the policy was. It mattered what party you supported.
Right. Was it? Well, did they try the other way around? Did they try it with the conservative supporters?
Same numbers.
Same thing.
Okay.
Oh,
this is why identity and self-image is so important. Now, here's where it's a little bit uneasy, but it's also,
you know what? Like, even in my own head, I'm thinking of like, if I was asked these questions as well, my own head, I'd be like, yeah, if the conservatives are doing it, I'd probably be okay with it. But if the liberals are doing it, they're probably going to sneak things into the, you know, these are the thoughts that are going on in my head, right? Because I don't trust them because, you know, where I stand politically, but I get it. Like,
it's a good idea to trust none of them, to be honest.
That's very good. That's very good advice. Absolutely.
So there's one other thing that I think is really key here. So if we look at Albert Bandera's work, right, which he showed that there's 4 conditions to move the moral compass. Okay. And 65% of the population are vulnerable to these things. Okay. So then if you think back, act, story, become.
Yes.
That's how it works. You get the behavior, the person rationalizes, and then they create that self-image. So the key is to get someone to act a certain way, isn't it? Okay. And consistently, because the self-image, the story will change and the self-image will change. The Bandera showed that under 4 conditions, people will start to do immoral behavior. And those 4 conditions are moral justification. Right. Oh, it's just the right thing to do, or, you know, for the right cause, all those things. Minimizing consequences, dehumanizing the victim. Okay. They deserve it, except we saw that with the unvaccinated, and displacing responsibility. I'm just following orders. Okay. So if you can get those 4 things, what you're going to see is a lot of people doing bad behavior, okay, and cheating. Now, if the incentive is strong enough, you're also going to see behavior change. So if we look at Wells Fargo, do you remember the Wells Fargo scandal?
No.
All right. So this is fascinating. Right. So Wells Fargo changed the incentives scheme. Okay.
Oh, no, I haven't heard of this.
Yeah, they changed it to give the staff bonuses, and it turned out that the bonuses became so important to their income if they opened new accounts for existing customers. Okay.
I have heard of this. Okay, I keep going.
It turned out that 5,200 employees committed fraud.
By just opening up multiple accounts for
open fraudulent accounts for all the existing customers. So what happened was there was this slippery slide of managers started getting bonuses, so they started encouraging it, and this whole culture become a cesspit of behavior, and people that spoke up were ostracized and all this thing. So it literally became the culture to cheat and scam. Okay. And that's pretty much where you can see a lot of politics operates now. People literally are, you know, once the integrity is gone, everything is easy from there. Okay. So once they get someone to do a few things poorly, then they tell the story, and then the identity changes, and you can see how they corrupt people through a very clearly laid out plan now with this self-perception theory.
Right. I mean, you could chalk that up, like most people would just chalk that up to being like, oh, that's a perverse incentive. And yeah, of course, people are cheaters. You get a lot of people cheating.
Yeah, but you see, once the image, but a lot of people, for instance, I just, from my father, I can't cheat at sport. Okay, so
Right.
even if it's just, you know, what he showed me. But if I'm in the woods and my ball is in a nasty lie, I take it from the nasty lie. Okay, somebody else that would have a different upbringing is going to move it. Okay, but I'm going to have, you know, it doesn't mean I'm an angel, because I've definitely got some other things that I probably want to improve. But basically, what's going on is that the person is often not consciously deciding.
Right.
That's the key. So this is the corruption happens when you get a behavior to occur repeatedly, and that's why when you think about the herding of, see this, because it really didn't occur to me how key this piece was.
Okay.
Fact that when the behavior happens, it becomes the habit creates a story, and then the story becomes the self-image. And when you think about your own self-image and what you think you'd want it to be, the resistance is the unconscious mind with the comfort of it. But if you know the levers, and that's the whole point of, because I can give people lots of stuff to read, but this is why we designed the workshop. If you can specifically do some things, like the classic is from the Tiny Habits. If you can shrink the behavior so it's manageable, so it's easy, do it, celebrate it, you're going to increase the chances of redoing that behavior significantly. Whereas most people accidentally do the opposite. They condition themselves not to want to do it.
Right.
Because
They condition themselves to hate it.
Yeah, because they bite off more than you can chew. And I remember when I worked as a personal trainer, like many decades ago, like in Sydney, you know, clients would come in for a first session. The trainer would assume the best thing to do is to smash the client. Work them out so hard so they get the experience, not realizing the client's not going to be able to walk for 3-4 days and doesn't come back.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah,
it sucks when you get like overworked.
But it's where the habit is that we have to do more than comfortable. But the thing is, if you create the positive association first, in a short space of time, you can actually move that comfort level so much that if the graduated steps are designed correctly, in no time at all, you can be far exceeding what you would have done anyway.
Well, that's just amazing. I mean, that's better than self-help.
Yeah. No, that's, well, the funny thing is, I think it's one of the ultimates in self-help, because I noticed, like, it's just a mind hack. So if I want to get tidy, I choose one part of my home and I get that tidy repeatedly, consistently. Okay, just one part. It might be the sink.
Okay.
And then what happens is it changes my self-image. And then, because the thing is, because I now enjoy doing washing up, and I've used a few of these techniques to do that. But like, I used to hate it, but now it's enjoyable. But here, I think the next subject, I think, is absolutely critical for where we are at this moment in time. When I talk to a lot of people,
well, before we get into that, do you want to talk about your workshop so people know?
Yeah. So we've basically taken these subjects, the self-perception theory. We've taken narrative transportation theory, which is how we get immersed in a story. We've taken behavior science, etc., and we designed this 90-minute workshop where and this comes from, I did this, funny enough, and I did this a few years ago, where you tell a partner what you want to happen over the next year, what your goals are. And what that partner does is constructs it a very, specific way, and then embellishes it and expands it. And then you have it played back to you. And when that happens, you get immersed into the story. And what happens is we also then soften the objections and the doubts and all those things. And then it creates such a visceral, spectacular feeling that then you get pulled towards it. Okay. And I did this like a couple of years ago, and it's funny because I should have done it many times since. And a year later, I noticed that everything that person had said happened in that year.
Wow.
Because I experienced it so, Because what we think about is when we think about the next year, we've got all the limitations that have been conditioned into us. We've got all the problems of the world, etc. But we got to take our power back, because we're being dictated to from like a pyramid structure, top down. But in fact, we need a grassroots, decentralized, localized. But the key is that we have to be able to know what motivates ourselves, know to be able to do behavior. So one of the biggest problems I see is the feeling of helplessness. Like, what can I do about this? It's too big and powerful. These people have all the resources, all the money, all this. What we've got is a couple of thousand megalomaniacs, right, who are just printing bits of paper. What can I do, said 7 billion people. Okay. So, and it's not related to how intelligent or skillful someone is, because you don't get to control what your adaptive unconscious feels about you unless you specifically look at it. So what I mean, so let me give you an example. I had dinner with a scientist about 3 years ago, and she was very outspoken, did lots of good work. And she turned to me, she said, "Oh, I'm just going to not bother anymore." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "Oh, I don't feel like it's having any effect." Okay. Now, that is the perfect state of mind that the propagandists want that scientist to be in.
Right.
See that? Now, did she choose that state of mind?
Well, she feels like she did.
Yeah, but she didn't.
Right.
She has responded to her environment. Okay. Now, this is one of the, for me, the most pervasive manipulations is if you give people two choices and they can't succeed at either, they give up.
Yes.
So if you feel like what you're doing has no effect and it happens continuously, you will feel learned helplessness. You will give up. I've experienced that myself. And that's why when me and Patrick did this thing, it had such a profound shift that I saw a video where a teacher installed learned helplessness in half her classroom in 20 minutes.
Whoa. Okay.
Here's how she did it. She gave out a question, but she gave out half the class a simple question, and she gave the other class an unanswerable question, like an impossible task. And at the end of the first one, she said, "Put your hand up if you've done it." So half the class puts their hand up, and the other half can't do it. And they look around thinking, well, they could, but I couldn't. She repeated that a few times. Then by the third or fourth time, the question was easy, but the half that didn't do it didn't even attempt it.
Wow.
Okay. So conditions have been set up intentionally that you can't affect the outcomes. But if you find a way to affect an outcome, no matter how small it is, you'll start to see yourself as someone that can get stuff done. And that's why we need to start small. And that's why starting small is such a powerful leverage, not for the fact of getting stuff done, but the way that you'll feel about what you can do. So one of the ladies come up to me at one of the conferences I spoke at, and she said to me, she said, "Oh, I just really want to thank you." I said, "Why?" She said, "Oh, you gave me the confidence to do some of the things I'm doing." I said, "Why? What happened?" She said, "Well," she went to one of the major supermarkets in the UK and she got the mask mandate overturned in 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Now, she thinks what that now does to her self-image.
She's a go-getter. She's that kind of person. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's going on is that by luck and chance and happenstance and situational design, all these things, if we are banging up to something that we can't get done, our unconscious mind is going to give up. That's why it's important to set yourself up for success. That's why it's important to find your environment that you can make a difference, because that making a difference will feed back to your self-image, and then you'll be able to go and go and go.
Wow, that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why because it's, again, with it doesn't matter how much you know. Your unconscious mind is not responding to your knowledge or intelligence or whatever. It's responding to what it sees you doing.
Right.
Okay. That's why it's important to, if you think about behavior change, Like if you say, oh, I'm going to like do this and do that, but you don't get it done, your mind's going to build the belief, oh, you're not the sort of person that gets things done. But if you shrink the change, consistently hold the pressure to the behavior, then the self-image is going to change.
And then I guess incremental,
yes,
going further with it just becomes easier and easier after that.
Yeah, and that's when you look at athletes, they use this a lot, and they use it in visualization. So they imagine themselves doing the thing, okay? Then they tell them story about it, and then it becomes their self-image. And that's why some of the best people in history have had the ability to ignore reality and have the reality in their head more important. People like Michael Jordan, etc. When you think about, you know, getting dropped and whatever, if he had gone, oh, I'm just not a good player, versus the story in his head becoming more important.
Right.
Because that's the key. It's your response is more important than the actual thing.
Wow. So yeah, it's kind of like the David Goggins, like just do it kind of thing. Like just get out, don't think about it, just get out there and do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't start off as a David Goggins. You have to start off as a doing 5 push-ups and then
exactly that.
Yeah, and enjoying it. Yay.
The key, I can't stress this enough, the key is your interpretation of it.
Okay.
That makes sense. So once you do 5 and then celebrate, and that's why being self-critical is really problematic because it goes such against your the way you want to develop behaviors. So being delusionally self-supporting can be good under certain conditions.
Yeah, as long as you're not being manipulated from something else.
You see, because the thing is, you've got to treat your unconscious mind really like an animal. Sometimes it doesn't there's like in certain parts of the brain there's not a language center. So this is why visualization and feeling are so key. But the feeling is so key because a behavior, effectively every organism on this planet has the same base coding, which is move towards pleasure and away from pain.
Okay
but we inadvertently make what we want to do painful.
Right.
Okay. But if that simple piece of knowledge there, if you make what you want to do pleasurable, that's going to increase the chances you redoing it significantly.
Yes.
Okay. And there are people that are wired the other way, which is, you know, if it's not painful, then they don't enjoy it, and et cetera, et cetera. But specifically, once you build a positive association, and that's why, you know, when people had built the positive association with standing up, it's the morally right thing to do. That's it. They're going to do that, and everything else will blend into the background.
Interesting. So tell us about the what is it? A seminar?
It's a workshop. So basically, we're running a couple specifically for Canadians. And it's $29. You can register at that link. If you put Clyde 5 at the checkout, you get $5 off.
Oh, okay. There's a discount for the community here.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be putting the link in the chat for everybody on all the different platforms. Check it out. So it's at reachingpeople.net/workshops.
Yeah.
And it's Clyde 5 at the.
Yeah.
Oh,
Clyde
okay. Wow.
5,
cool.
uppercase. So Clyde, the number 5. And of course, if someone does it and then they want their money back, no questions asked, or money back, no hassle.
Okay. So it's not a big it's not a big expense right out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is, because I'm uneasy selling things. I'm not like I don't like marketing because I kind of expose them, but we've got to fund ourselves somehow. And the thing is, people have been asking for some solutions, and this is one that me and Patrick have spent a lot of time on, because we think it literally can change the direction of our lives. If we intentionally say, where do we want to go? What are the things holding us back? How do we create such a powerful vision that pulls us towards it? This is really key. And even the stuff we spoke about, you know, because I put articles on the website, just knowing about them is so key, because you can protect yourself more. and you can start to really become who you want to be, not who we've been conditioned to be.
Right. Well, I can attest to this, and I didn't know that this was what I was doing, but about 4 years ago, I made a New Year's resolution to change a bit of a behavior. So one thing that I wanted to do was, instead of staying up late and then waking up just in the nick of time to get things going and get to work, I flipped it on its head. I started going to bed really early, and I would wake up really early, and then I would feel awake and energized in my early hours while I did my hobby stuff. And then I'd go to work, and then I'd be tired by the end of the day, and I'd go to bed, and I just get good rest. And what it was I changed that, and unbelievably, it just so happened to be at the same time, just a month before the Freedom Convoy happened, and I'm sitting in front of all of my studio equipment, and I'm like, I guess I have time. I'm going to talk about this. And everything sprung out of that. Everything literally sprung out of a behavioral change that I wanted to do for myself so that I could feel better just on a day-to-day. And that I went from being kind of a night owl to an early morning person in no time.
And think about your language. That's now your identity.
As I'm a morning person.
Yeah. And people say that, and of course, but your behavior triggered a change in a story and then a change in your identity.
Wow, that's something else.
So literally, I mean, this is what gives me such hope. Like the thousands and thousands of people that can just take back control of their own behavior and become the captain of their own ship. This is the biggest thing that those pushing the bullshit agenda do not want. They don't want people taking control of themselves. Everything's about outsourcing control. But the thing is, when you start, you only need to start small, and that's what's really key to get massive leverage and massive change. And that's what me and Patrick were absolutely blown away. Like after a few weeks, we were so like, I get so much more done now. Like my whole life completely changed because I'd done many things over the last 4 or 5 years, but my mindset, that change made such a difference.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I got a couple of questions here from the chat. Got Chris Sharoon for 10 says, why is WeChat not seen as a tool of foreign espionage? I mean, that's are you familiar with WeChat?
I've never heard of WeChat.
WeChat's just another communication app. It's another one of those, but I think it's run by the Chinese communists, or at least it's the approved one that we're allowed to use over here. They're not allowed to use our apps for whatever reason they see fit on their side.
Yeah, well, the other thing I've used this on my golf as well, right? And what's funny is that at the golf club, nobody can make sense of how I've improved in such a short space of time.
Oh, okay. And
it's ridiculous. Like
you've used this technique? How?
Yeah, I've used this understanding of self-perception and a few other things because I understand how to create feelings and all these and resolve blocks in the mind, all these things. And we had a bet with a couple of other players who are much better than me, and I just smashed them, and it was so funny. And it's just people have not been able to rationalize, and they keep asking me why, and I say, oh, it's this or that, because it's only when they ask me seriously will I'll start to tell them. Because the thing is, our behavior reflects who we think we are. So if I think I'm a bad putter or a bad golfer, that's what my behavior will do. If I think I can make a change in the world, that's what I'm going to do. And that's why once everyone realizes that we are being repressed, we're having our consciousness held under the water like a football, the minute that is released, we will pop up and we can then start to do what we want. But motivation is short-lived, okay? But once you changed what I mean by that is that you're going to feel a certain amount of motivation now, okay? But if you don't make changes, that will wear off. But if you do one thing tomorrow and then consistently do that, that's the lever that's going to create motivation.
Wow. Okay.
That makes sense? Because a lot of people, because motivation comes and goes, but when you've got this unconscious motivation, when you've got this habit, you don't need to be motivated. Like, you just do it.
Because I guess it becomes the path of least resistance.
Exactly that. That, what you don't realize how profound what you just said is.
Like, even though it's not the path of least resistance, but
it becomes the path of least resistance because
it appeases your personality, or what
becomes automatic.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, because that's the thing. See, because another time we can talk about choice architecture, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create the path of least resistance, how they want you to act. But if standing up becomes a path of least resistance, if paying with cash becomes a path of least resistance, if protecting your property becomes a path of least resistance for you, because for instance,
I feel that way. I feel that way because, I stood up because I felt I wouldn't be able to live with myself in the future. And that's what I had in my head.
It was the only path.
Right.
Yes.
Because if I didn't, I would,
the other
I'd be guilty. I'd feel guilty about it.
The other paths have too much resistance.
Yes.
And that's the way you set it up. You set it up for the path that you want to take. Like, once you set it up as a path of least resistance, it's automatic. Then you don't have to think about it.
Wow. Okay. I got another one here from Andrew. For $2, he says this is so based and great for self-reflection. Well, I'm glad you're getting something out of it, because I'm getting tons. This is amazing. Absolutely. I got another one from Chris Sharoon for $5. Says, remember, you can't self-analyze. Impossible. You can only self-reflect.
Yeah, that's very important, because
I've never heard that before.
Well, yeah, because you really don't know. I'm going to say something now along that you've got to be a blindfolded mechanic.
Well, I'm a mechanic.
Exactly.
I'm starting in the right place.
Yeah. Now, this was something that come to me, which is when I'm working with clients, I can't see in the inside of their mind. Okay.
Of course.
So we have to be blindfolded mechanics. We can only infer what's in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's really important, because you can self-reflection is to look at your own behavior and to go, okay, well, I'm doing this. Because I remember when I worked with Bruce Lipton, we had dinner one night and he said to me, and he wrote the book, The Biology of Belief. And he said, David, if you want to know your beliefs, just look around at your life. Okay. Because then you can infer, because what's going on, we've got two self-image. Well, we've got more than two self-images, but the two main ones are, we've got the real self-image, which controls our behavior. And then we've got the one that we project to ourselves and others. Okay.
Right.
And that one that we project to ourselves and others is open to a bit of biasm. Okay?
So what's the difference between the ego and that which you're describing?
Well, the ego for me is the projected image.
Okay. So that's that.
Yeah. So, and you'll do that to protect it, etc. But for instance, like if somebody is just complying without questioning, like because that's the thing. I did a presentation where we looked at a fictional doctor that did as he was told, and one that stood up. And the one that does as he's told thinks he's rational, thinks he's evidence-based, and thinks that he will change his mind with evidence, but they never did. Okay, so that's the projected self-image. Now, that's manipulated by the propagandists as well, because they give them all this, I'm following the science, etc. But if you observe,
you have to actually follow through with those steps to actually be that thing, though, right?
Yeah, well, that's where you can, that's where the self-observation is key, because, and this is where, I think it was Krishnamurti that said this, observation of oneself is the greatest skill to master. So if you just observe yourself without being critical or analyzing, etc., and say, oh, I'm doing that, I wonder why I did that, or I'm saying this. So I had one where I remember in conversations, I would say certain things, and I said to myself, why would I say that? And I think, oh, because I want to connect with people. But then when I released that need to connect, I didn't have to, bring those things up or speak, because it really is, a lot of our behavior has come and been built before we were even conscious. So we can't be critical of ourselves, because it's like saying I'm going to be critical of the 4-year-old David that, you know, cried because he wanted some attention. Like, that's just a behavior that, not that that was my behavior, but I got similar ones. But we've developed those to get what we need, and then a lot of the time they just carry on into adulthood. But if
you can observe that type of behavior and then want to change it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And well, there's a paradox in there that first you have to accept it in order to change it.
That's true.
You know, but first you've got to be aware of it. You can't be aware of it if you don't reflect and observe. And of course, you don't want to reflect and observe if you're just going to feel bad, and you're only going to feel bad if you're critical. So if you have sort of loving observation.
So I just thought of something. So why is it that some people, they'll have a behavior, but then they'll deny that behavior when somebody's confronted with it? Like, you act like this is how you do things, and they'll say, no, I don't do things like that.
Yeah, because the brain's always striving to feel good. So denial is a way to resolve the dissonance.
But it doesn't change the behavior.
No, it won't. But that's the thing about, see, because what you've then got, we get into this again, because there's so many roads we could go down each of these subjects. So, you know, you want to dedicate a few hours to them. But there's basically three states of being, which is reactive, responsive, and creative. But if you're reactive, responsive, you're still a victim to circumstance. And the problem is that when you point something out with someone, they will often react with a defense mechanism.
Right.
Okay. But they're not thinking, they're not conscious. And a lot of time afterwards, they might go, oh, I'm sorry, I reacted that way, etc. But that's the key, is to get into that reaction. And if you can, and I have actually done this successfully with, I used to get angry at things. And anger a lot of the time is a sign of powerlessness. You just feel powerless. No. So I would, for instance, I'd be trying to carry too many things in my arms, and then I'd drop one, and then I'd get angry. And I'd be thinking, well, that's kind of redundant. Why am I doing that? But that was just how I would learn to do it around my parents. You know, that was just the reactive response. But until I was aware that that was what I was doing, I wasn't able to change it. But then what happens is that if you can slow a behavior down and become conscious as you're doing it, sometimes that's enough just to stop it.
Interesting.
Okay. Because you can go, you know, and that's why, you know, in particular a lot of sports, everything, that when you do something in slow motion and consciousness comes back in, you're then conscious. But if you're not conscious and it's just an automatic response, you have no control. You're a victim to your conditioning.
Yeah, you just become an automaton at that point.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that don't want to think, don't want to reflect, so they are effectively automatons. And you've spoke to many of them, like you talk to them, and they just, you know, you can. It's almost like a computer game. You can say one thing and you can guarantee the response. I mean, I started mapping them out.
NPC theory, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Have you've heard of NPC theory?
Yeah. It's the non-player.
The non-player characters, yeah.
Yes, but you see, this is the thing, because I think it was Jung that said, you know, there's so much evil in the world because man is so hopelessly unconscious. See, and that's the thing, because you want to bring people conscious, but of course, what's happened is most of the people, and I use the term freedom movement just loosely of those of us that want to preserve freedom, etc., and doing things, but a lot of the time we are creating a reaction in someone rather than a reflection.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And if you're
triggering a response, and
of course, this is the communication piece of the project, is that getting to a rational conversation with someone is navigating an obstacle course, but most of the time we've got a blindfold on. So when you know the obstacles, you stop triggering those reactions, and then you can get change. And we've seen it. I've told people a bunch of stories where we got massive change in a short space of time by just being able to ask the right question or the story or whatever. But this is the thing. It's like you don't want to be a series of reactions. You want to be in a creative space where you can decide how you want to be, how you want to live your life, what sort of community you want to live in, what sort of society you want to live in. These are the questions. And people that are aware, and most people watch it.
Does that then become more tiring? Are you using more energy to be that person?
Yeah. Right. Let me ask you this question. When you're doing something creative, does it feel tiring?
No, I feel energized by it. I
Yeah.
feel it because it's
And
enjoyable.
yes, and this is where when you stop having all the goals that society have told you should have, and you break away all that crap, and you start moving towards the goals that are really, and this way you can talk about, if it's your spirit or your soul, whatever it is that feels right for you, you'll be energized. And you'll
Okay.
be in the creative space, and you'll be creating, not reacting and responding. Okay, and we all know what that feeling is, where you're in that creative space. It just is for me, it's so fulfilling.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yeah. And there's other times
I love introducing more people to it. So like I do videos. So I feel like I'm in that space when I'm making videos. And I've been introducing. So recently, a friend of mine who I've been bugging because he's got such a great personality and a great character. And I said, you'd be awesome on videos. Like, just get your story out there. His name is Jack Decker. He started doing videos, right? Because I pressured him, pushed him. But once he started doing it, it just became like, because I said, just do one every day, and then you'll get used to doing that.
Yes.
Now it's a behavior. He loves it, and he's just
who he is.
It's just what he does now.
Yeah. So now, hopefully, whilst at the beginning, the concept of self-perception theory sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? That it's actually your behavior that drives a lot of the opinions and the belief. But now when you think about it, it's obvious. And that's the journey that I took, when now I am very careful about what I do. That makes sense? Just from a careful, because I know that if it's a slippery slope. Okay. But it can be, once you've built the habits, these things become easy.
So, okay, here's a question. I know a lot of people that do, mundane tasks as a form of entertainment. Whether it's video games or things like that. that's one form of it. But I knew a guy back in Eastern Canada. He used to have a thing where he would just like to smoke a joint, and then he would sand body panels, and he would just get into this zone of sanding body panels. So what is that behavior? Because it's become like an sort of, I guess.
Right. Well, they have a thing in golf. If you're humming when you're about to take the golf shot, you can't have negative thoughts.
Are you serious? That's one of the techniques you use to get better at golf?
Yeah, because basically, conscious awareness, I think it was George Miller, conscious awareness is 7 plus or minus 2. And what I mean by that, if you were to tell me your phone number, would you list out 9 digits in a row, or would you break it up?
I'd break it up. Yeah.
Yeah, because your consciousness can't handle that many digits in a row. So if you fill that space with a mundane activity, you can't think about your problems or anything else.
Okay.
That makes sense. So basically, if you think about one thing, you can't think about another thing. You can generally only do one thing at a time. So if he's waxing or painting or whatever, it's so relaxing because it's a functional management. But ideally, what you want to do is create such a lovely unconscious mind that it doesn't torture you. Because the thing is, it's only torturing people because it's unopened and unresolved stuff. But when you start closing those loops off, unanswered questions, you close those off, you start freeing up space. And that's why key, because the thoughts and the feelings that come up is communication from your unconscious mind. Okay. But because the propagandists have put errors and they've told us stuff that isn't true, that's why the brain will sometimes just go around in a loop.
Okay.
For instance, if someone has a belief that nothing they do is good enough, and they had another belief that says you'll be good enough when you succeed, they're just going to be caught between those two beliefs.
Because they'll always not succeed, and they'll always never be
whatever they do will never be good enough. Even if they come first, it will never be good enough.
Oh, because that's not a success to them, because they're convinced that everything's not good enough.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. That's tragic.
beliefs like survival of the fittest are much more dangerous than anyone realizes.
Okay.
Because in fact, when you look at some of the theories, it's survival by cooperation, not by the fittest.
That's actually how it works in nature.
Yeah. Think about it. If it was truly survival of the fittest, people would be going down the street, knocking old people over, stealing their money. Like, well, that's a banker, obviously, but the majority of people, like, that's why that's such a dangerous thought, because that's when you get the bankers going, oh, greed is good, survival of the fittest, we're going to trounce on everyone else. But if they had a completely different belief system saying it's survival cooperation, oh, if I help my fellow man out and I've got enough, which doesn't have to be like socialism, which isn't that. It's like, I want to control everything is what socialism is. But you see, it's those underpinning beliefs are so key to people's behavior.
Yeah. So is it I'm drawing a blank. Richard Dawkins, the famous evolutionary biologist. He wrote the book The Selfish Gene, and that got a lot of Wall Street types saying, like, yeah, look, we're doing what nature tells us to do.
Yeah,
they're justifying it.
Justification. And you can see,
but he followed that up by doing a study of a bunch of some type of bird that lives on an island, and talking about the tit for tat strategy, and they eloquently explains how some of these birds would get the mites off of the other birds because they couldn't do it themselves because of the shape of their beaks, but they could do it to each other, and their behavior was very dependent on the other bird's behaviors. So a bird that would do tit for tat, sometimes would lose out because he would not get the gnats taken off of him by a bird that would tit and then take off, basically. But in the long term, it was the birds that always did tit for tat that would benefit, because the birds who didn't reciprocate, the other birds would remember them, and they kind of get blackballed, and then they wouldn't get serviced, and then it worked out in the long run.
Well, that's how a society would properly even out. Yeah.
Yeah, you're always going to have sociopaths. I mean,
well, we've got people socially engineering the populace, which is the problem.
Right.
Okay? And
which is different than thousands of years of evolution.
Yeah. I mean, like, what a lot of people believe now is absolute nonsense. It's so removed from reality, because historically people would build their maps of reality through experience. But in fact, most people get it through a screen now.
Yes.
And historically, a screen was to cover something up. It's a smoke screen.
It's a smoke screen. It's also Plato's cave, right? It's
Yep. Well, this is when you start to think about this, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that we have some techniques that I use with clients where we can change history, and we just create a different script in the mind, and then things about them change.
You create a different
so I'd say to someone, I'd say to someone, they might say, I'm not good enough, right? And then they would, how they theorize that. And I said, what would happen is, when you were a child, you had a very wise person, and then that person come to you and they said to you, they watched you do something, they said, you did that really well. Okay. And just imagining that happening creates a visceral shift for them.
Serious?
Yeah, it's really incredible. The things that you can do when we don't realize, the voice in our head is repetitive and it's just habitual. But when you consciously change that, it can have profound effects.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible.
I think that, a lot of us have had our self-image built by coincidence and circumstances. And you could say that, it got you to the person that you are. And then you say, okay, well, what's the person that I want to be? And you've got to be willing to let go who you think you are to step into who you can be.
Yeah, you have to want to change.
Yeah, and that's not always easy, but you can make it much easier with some just real simple changes. Like for instance, I've learned that sometimes I'll know that I need to do something, and when I think about doing that thing, it doesn't feel good, but then I can change that feeling. Okay, and I can
Mhm.
find a way that I find a way to say, well, actually, that's going to be good to do, and then the feeling changes, and then I go and do it, rather than just being a slave to my feelings.
Wow. You can really like it's that easy
Well, it
to just
sounds that easy, but when you understand, like for instance, so if we think about, let me think about an example that I did recently. So yeah, so I would say, what's one? Oh yeah, so I wanted to ask someone a favor, okay?
Mhm.
And then when I thought about doing it, I had this feeling of being uncomfortable, okay? And then what I did was I just used I used things like the Sedona method and a few other things, and I just sat with the feeling. I allowed myself to feel it, and then I let it go. And then when I thought about asking that person for a favor, it felt okay, because the feeling was a reaction, and that reaction is from my conditioning.
Right.
But in the moment, you can do one or two things. You can, and the thing is, if you do that process enough, it actually changes the conditioning.
Right. So you recondition yourself to
Exactly.
just have a
Because
different
the
feeling about it.
feeling is just a message. But of course, once you've got that feeling that's connected to the original event or story, you won't always remember it. But when you release the feeling, it actually recodes the memory, is what we think is happening. Because a guy I worked with has had 4 papers published on this, and it's the emotional mental imaging. But it's so powerful because once we become aware of this, we can actually transcend, because feelings are messages.
Mhm.
Okay. But of course, much of the propaganda is about getting people to feel a certain thing and then feeling compelled to act a certain way. Um,
Right.
and I saw a post recently where a guy was saying nearly every spiritual text or old book, and he said in the Bible, I think it mentions it 240 times, have no fear. Okay.
That's
And
conditioning.
yeah, fear is basically comes from the conditioning, and fear is the currency of control. But if you know how to release the fear, then you can't be controlled, and you can learn to influence yourself to do what you really want to do. That's why feelings are so key. And that would be another subject we can go into, because for me, the feelings are literally the mechanism by which people are controlled.
Right, because we're rudimentary animals that
Yeah.
navigate the world on don't want pain, I want
Yeah.
pleasure.
So think about that. The feeling gets the behavior happening. The behavior creates the habit. The habit then follows with a story, and the story then creates the self-image.
Wow. That's simple.
Yeah. So learning to understand your feelings and sit with them, and that's what true meditation is. The somatic meditation is to resolve those feelings. But to understand that it's just a message. It's not the truth, it's not the fact. It might be, but it's a message.
Wow, that's fascinating. But then so here's the thing, we've got to watch out for others that are trying to get us to do things.
Well, the thing is, if we had a different society, we wouldn't have to. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Well, if we had a real trusting
Yeah.
society and they
Because
weren't being
you see,
manipulated.
in tribes, like say you had a small tribe, that behavior wouldn't work. Like manipulating someone wouldn't work, because it would just be, you'd just be kicked out of the tribe, etc. But it's because these people are above the tribe, and they're manipulating all the different tribes externally. This is why it's working. They understand, basically, if we don't understand ourselves and we're not controlling ourselves, then somebody else will be.
So it's an interesting one. When you go to the airport
Yeah.
and there's no one in line,
Yeah.
but they have the turnstile thing that you have to go back and forth in. Is there a reason why they keep that up?
I'm not sure.
So instead of just walking a straight line to the counter, you have to do this zigzag back and
Oh,
forth.
right, that. Well, a lot of those things are just everyone following the orders and doing as they're told. Because then you can just go onto autopilot and not have to think about it. And that's one of the things in the Bandera stuff is just displaced responsibility. I'm just following orders. I mean, people don't want to think, you know, they just want to do as they're told a lot of the time. People, for the main part, want an easy life. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we're not in a position where that's an option anymore.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I want to think. I want to be thinking all the time.
Yeah.
I don't. Is that bizarre that some people are? Yeah, that
we have a positive association with it.
That's what it is.
And that's why people run marathons. Okay. Because there's a positive association, there's rewards and punishments. So that's the key. Like, you get up and do things because there's a reward or a consequence. Okay. And people run marathons, which I wouldn't if you paid me, is because there's such a powerful reward for them. So incentives are very key. So if you set your life up with the correct incentives and consequences, and its carrot is much better than stick, then you can really get it to work for you.
Wow.
But it's about having it automatically, because things like if you put your, say you want to go to the gym and you put your gym clothes by the front door, you're much more likely to go.
Put your gym clothes more closely, like close to the front door.
Yeah, just remind you the fit, because every little obstacle, see, obstacles aren't measured in equal measure. So I had to do something earlier and that thing was like 2 seconds, but I almost didn't do it because I couldn't be bothered to go into the other room to do it. Yeah. Like
there's a bunch of those things for me. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So it's called removal of friction. So the friction is the thing that slows you down. And of course, what they did during the pandemic, or whatever that was, is that they put obstacles in the road they didn't want you to take, and they painted Teflon on the road that they wanted you to take.
They did say that again. You put,
so say you had 2 roads.
Yeah.
Okay. One of them's comply, the other one's not comply. Okay. On the not comply route, they put obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and on the comply route, they painted it with Teflon.
So it's smooth, easy going.
Yeah. Okay. So standing up, objecting, not wearing a mask, all of these things were so hassle that you had to be very clear and you know, and have that self-image to do. Whereas a majority of people, and this is one of the key things, those 9 things are why you didn't comply and the others did. One of them is clear thinking on your values.
Right.
Okay. If you are fuzzy on it, you're much more likely to cave in.
You might bend your values to
because
rationalize it, because you're rationalizing in your head.
Oh, it's just a mask. It's just 6 foot, blah, blah, blah. Whereas I'm not wearing this mask because I know it's a psychological manipulation and it's going to harm my health. It doesn't matter what studies or bullshit they show me, I'm not going to cave in.
Wow. It blows me away every time I chat with you, because it's so simple though. Like, and that's what's crazy about it. Like, and I guess that's what's elegant about it. It's so simple. But
the term is the elusive obvious.
The elusive obvious.
That once it's pointed out to us and once it's explained, it becomes obvious. And then what you have is the curse of knowledge, which is a really important concept, is that when you're talking to someone that isn't aware of the things you're aware of, we often don't take that into account.
Oh, and then we sound like crazy people. Yeah.
So this is the thing about the elusive obvious. Like, if you can point it out in such a way that it becomes, oh yeah, of course. And that's why self-perception theory, hopefully now the conversation we've had, it's obvious how important it is.
Wow. That's incredible. It's funny because I was just thinking of another expression we have in auto mechanics, and it's any tool that you have in your hand can become a hammer if it needs to be, but the rule is how many feet away from your toolbox you are, because it's the going over and getting the the hammer out of the toolbox that's the hassle. And a tool that you really like, you have to be really far from the toolbox before you start using it as a hammer. That's how it works. But it's so funny because it fits exactly the criteria of what you're talking about here. Again, it's so simple. It's just the idea that behaviors just become what? Like, how does it, the way you explain it, it sounds very elegant.
Yeah. So basically what you've got is you've got act, explain, become.
Act, explain, become. And you're not explaining it to anybody else but yourself. You're explaining this to your own self.
But that explain part, that's why the propagandists gave everyone a buffet of explanations.
So they give you a ton of excuses for it. So you can fill your own head with it.
One up. See, now the thing is, if you're thinking one up, you might not think up one that they want you to think up. But if they give it to you, path of least resistance.
If they give it to you, then you've already got it. It's in your tool chest, and you can just pull that out as you need.
Look at this. This is one of the funniest.
Wow.
Right? How many times did you hear someone go, I've just caught COVID for the 72nd time. I've had my 51st booster, but I'm so grateful.
Because it would have been so much worse if I hadn't had it. Or I had all those 51 boosters.
Now that was the pre-program, the predictive programming to provide the explanation once the behavior occurred.
Which is ludicrous, because anyone that says, oh, well, you've had a vaccine for a thing, if you're immune to it, then it means you'd never catch it.
Yeah.
And once you catch it, it doesn't matter the severity of it.
Yeah.
Vaccines don't control severity.
It doesn't have to make sense. We're creatures that rationalize. We're not rational creatures.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, we rationalize even if it makes no sense.
Yeah, and the thing is, and that's why if you are self-reflective and you start to observe your own thoughts and thinking and says, does that add up? You can become so concise and clear in your own thinking. Okay, because you can know that you're going to want to move to what feels good, but if you get comfortable in discomfort and it feels good to challenge yourself, then the sky's the limit.
So for people like in our for lack of a better term, community in the online space that are, I guess, skeptical people, I guess we would have similar behaviors where we'd have knee-jerk reactions to things, like I was saying before about the shibboleth. You hear something, if the government tells you anything, it's just like your knee-jerk reaction is to say, screw that, I ain't doing it, right?
Yeah. Which is a fairly good and useful thing to do. Well, but again, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Yeah. So we think a lot in metaphor, and that's why awareness is so key. Okay. And if we can foster an environment where people can, ask a question, you can go, hang on a minute, am I wrong there? And not even wrong, but do I need to relook at that? And that's a sign of of an intelligent person.
Wow. So yeah, it all comes down to self-reflection.
But the reaction is key. Like, if people are reacting, they're usually not thinking. But if we can bring consciousness into that process and slow it down and pause, that's why pausing is so key. Okay. Then, of course, change can happen. And much of the conversations that people would have with people that bought the nonsense, they weren't talking to a rational person. You were talking to a person reacting emotionally.
So pausing is key because it gives the listener a chance to reflect on what it is that you're saying. Is that what you mean?
Well, in both ways, also pausing in your own way. But see, there's lots of ways to communicate better with someone that's been conditioned. And that's what, communication skills are important, but communicating with someone that's been conditioned with, wrong ideas is much more challenging. And what you really don't want to do is you don't want to create a reaction because they're not thinking.
Because then you're not dealing with their what would I guess that's the conscious self.
Yeah,
you're not dealing with
dealing with the creative, the awareness, the conscious. You're dealing, and the thing is, if they could hear themselves speak, but they can't hear themselves speak because they're like foaming at the mouth with emotion. But that's why if they could truly objectively hear themselves speak, they would see the ludicrousness of stuff that comes out their mouth.
Wow. So that's the way to reach people.
Yeah, there's actually a document on the website under might be resources, the do's and don'ts in conversation, and we list out a lot of the obstacles that we mapped out.
Yeah, well, eliciting an emotional response is not gonna win anything. So we all know this, right? At least we should know this. But owning somebody, you know what I mean? Like the whole thing on the internet that everybody likes to do.
Yeah,
you're not winning an argument, and then it turns into a sport of, I have my viewers and you have your viewers. And who's going to have the bigger group of people agreeing with me at the end? It's not about actually conversing and having a new understanding at the end of it.
Yeah.
Internet blood sports, as you would.
Yeah. If you want to reach someone, you've got to be in their corner, not in the ring with them. If you're having the only time that I'd say it's okay not to do that. Well, it's okay not to do that if you choose not to. It's your choice. You can, and if someone's being an arsehole, then, fair play, point out what an arsehole they are. But if you're having a public debate with someone and the audience is the key, then by all means, show the other argument is invalid.
Yeah, I find that's contemporary argumentation at this point. It's not about actually coming to any sort of understanding. Where I find that kind of goes too far is people get a habitual way of communicating with people because of the way they communicate with people online, that these attitudes come out in real life.
Yeah.
And I've had it in points where I've had private conversations with people and they'll disagree with me. And I'll be like, there's nobody watching this right now.
Yeah.
It's just you and me, we can cut that, aspect of how we communicate with each other. Perhaps let's just try to find some common ground. You know what I mean?
Well, there was a very good basketball coach that said we can disagree without being disagreeable.
And what does that mean?
It means that we can have a difference of opinion without being nasty about it.
Oh, so yeah, you don't have to be combative. You could just know that you just don't agree on a thing.
Yeah, and I might say, oh, I see it this way. I wonder why I see it that way. Just not being defensive of your own ideas a lot of the time helps the other person not be defensive about theirs.
Well,
and the thing is, we're not going to be, undoubtedly, we can't be right all the time. So we've got to be open to being, having our ideas changed on some level. I mean, it becomes problematic when there's so many clear ones that the government's pushing absolute nonsense, and we know that's nonsense, that we can think that, everything we believe is that same way.
David, you're a wealth of knowledge on this stuff, and it's unbelievable. And I want more people to go see what it is that you guys are working on over at Reaching People. So I'm going to plug your website, whether you like it or not.
Thank you.
Get on over. There's a wealth of knowledge in here. Reaching People. I mean, it's a free website to just go read through all this information, behavior, communication, messaging, lots and lots of resources on the page. There's you, David Charalambous. What's your actual title as a researcher?
We say behavior and communication expert is what we do. If you scroll up, you'll see the latest thing we're doing under events.
Oh, under events. Let's get there right here.
Yeah. And this one, so the first two are specifically for Canada. I mean, anyone can join from anywhere. But exploring your future story. is this workshop, which we're going to do 90 minutes. So you create that very powerful story of what you want your, the next year, whatever you choose. And we're going to show you how to frame or phrase that in such a way that you can really believe that it's possible.
So like provable results backed in real science. This is not just,
yeah, well,
you're not pulling out dowsing rods and crystals or anything. This is really behavioral science and how to get yourself into a position that you'd much rather be in.
Yeah. Because the thing is, we all be a good idea to say, well, okay, what do I want to do over the next year, setting our goals, etc. But a lot of us have negative association to goals, and that's understandable because we set them, we haven't achieved them, but all of that is just a feeling. Okay, we can overcome.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Amazing. And you know what? Like I didn't even realize I was using some of these techniques in my past, and I attribute a lot of the successful things that I've ever done in life to this sort of approach to things. Where I didn't even realize that I was doing that. And I think a lot of people do this in successful endeavors that they've done without realizing it. It's just, well, we're just hardwired for this. You're kind of hacking your own firmware, right?
Yeah, but this is the mechanism, and that's the thing. When you know the mechanism, you wouldn't just stumble across it accidentally. You can be very intentional about it.
Well, that's fascinating. That's just incredible. I find it just absolutely enamoring. This is really cool. I got a couple of more comments here. One from Chris Heron. 5 says tribe theory is no different than today. It's an echo chamber. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah,
well, you get the group, exchanging ideas, and then they have these behaviors, and then it just becomes an echo chamber. And that's where, if you can break the glass ceilings of the echo chambers, then you can start to open people's minds.
So how can you test it to see if you're in an echo chamber? Like, say you,
well, if
maybe you don't believe that you are in one, and
well, you can't help to be in them because you're going to be surrounded by people that have similar opinions, etc. And that's why you've got to be, look for ways to be objective and ask challenging questions. And in fact, there's lots of ways that companies and certain organizations set things up where they have certain people that have to provide alternative ideas. I know when I was working with some of the poker players, there was a technique that was called argue like a politician, where you look at all the options and you argue for all of the options. Okay. And then you see which one. So for instance, in poker, you might have a decision where do I fold or do I raise or whatever. And then you basically just argue that each of them's the right thing. That makes sense. So you're looking at a much more balanced view rather than reacting emotionally.
Gotcha. Right. Because a lot of your tells would come out of the emotional reaction as well, right?
Oh yeah, that's a whole different thing. You can really see. When I was working the poker players, we could get people off tilt or remove the emotions, and this is what I want to work on with some of the golf stuff as well. That once you remove all the fear out of hitting a ball, like the score just comes down significantly. I mean, I beat my best score a couple of weeks ago, and then I almost hit it about 3 or 4 times in the same week, which is just unheard of. Like, because I changed my self-perception about myself. And the funny thing is that other players resisted it at first, but when I kept hitting the scores, everyone else had to change theirs and that's another thing that we can go into. That there's another part of this that's really important. So tonight we've talked about self-perception theory, but there's another thing is that how we infer about others and how we infer about the world. That's very fascinating.
Wow. Oh, so we could see the world and view the world completely differently if we
well, basically, this is how a lot of propaganda works: is that you inductively infer, i.e., you make a load of assumptions.
Right.
So when they create scenes, for instance, if you go into so our education is we're put in a room where someone is the authority, okay, and we have to make a load of assumptions about this to survive. Right, I've got to do as I'm told. I've got to, mustn't punch the other kid. So you learn the rules, okay? But a lot of them you don't learn explicitly. You learn them by inducing inductively, like
Right.
so you just make assumptions.
Yeah, you don't learn not to punch other kids by having punched other kids.
Yeah, there's just so many things. You might see it, but there's loads of things in school where they say really school is the indoctrination, because you're learning, oh, I must obey authority, I must do as I'm told, I must do all these things, and it just creates such a certain self-image about someone. But a lot of that happens unconsciously.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I don't know if that's always a good thing, especially the way they've been running the schools here in Canada. Holy cow.
Well, no,
that's terrifying.
It doesn't. It's not. I mean, there was a book, School is No Place for Children. Like the way it's running now, there's too much teaching and not enough learning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Got another one here from Chris Heron for 10 says, I'm paying $10 for your guests to learn about WeChat. Please read about it.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna open it up now and have a quick look.
Yeah.
So I remember to, because it's 4:45 in the morning for me here.
So that's how it is when we do these chats, because you're in England, and I really appreciate it that you take the time to what is it, you half your sleep, you break your sleep up so that you can come on the podcast. And I mean, it's really appreciative.
Yeah, I've got, Canada is one of the ones that, as a country is really sad to see what's going on there, because I've got a lot of Canadian friends. I've been there a bunch of times. I got good ties to Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So that's a lot of place where I got a lot of my viewers. So I'm happy to do this, and it's always fun. We always get into a very interesting conversation. So I just asked about WeChat as a Chinese super app that combines messaging and social media. Yeah, so something like that would be propaganda on steroids.
Yeah. And I think you can pay people. There's a pay service through WeChat too, so you can transfer each other money. They're really trying to make it the only app, basically.
Yeah, sounds daunting.
It does sound daunting, but David, thank you so much for joining, and stick on the line. But we'll turn off the live chat. I want to thank everybody for coming out. It's amazing that so many people want to come and learn about these topics, because this is very important. If we're going to figure out how to solve our problems and the situation that we have, especially with, a very low trust society and a government and other agencies and entities, corporations and whatnot that want to affect our behavior, change the way we think, it's important to get on top of this and understand it. So thank you, everybody, for tuning into this. Thank you, David. And we'll see you all in the next one.
Yes.